Welcome to the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, episode 172 with me, Chris Rickenbaugh. Today, I'm going to be talking about what's been going on in my business over the past week with letting go of a contractor. So I'm going to be documenting kind of what the next steps are, what I'm going through, and how I'm going to be able to finish these projects. So if you haven't listened to this podcast before, this is the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast with me, Chris Rickenbaugh, and I am documenting my journey in real estate and business, and also bringing on high-level investors to share their stories and how they built their businesses. You can follow me on Instagram and TikTok at chris.rickenbaugh. That's chris.reicenbach. And if you're listening to this podcast, stay right where you are, or you can listen on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Podbean, and Amazon. So let's hop into the topic today. So after working with only one contractor for a little over the past year, or basically this last year and a half since I started, I've had to let that person go. And it was for, just kind of a majority of different reasons. And, it just wasn't working out at the end of the day. I had some issues with quality, and most of it stemmed around me not being able to, fund the project all the way through. So we had to kind of start and stop. But the problem at the end of the day was, yes, the money is having an issue, but that doesn't, talk about quality. That shouldn't be affecting the quality. And that's the biggest issue I had because, for me to be able to, hire somebody where maybe the quality isn't great, what happens is what the contractor can come in and say, oh yeah, that's just like a $200 fix. Where for me, I'm having a seller walk this property and go, yeah, I don't like that. I'm just not going to buy the house. So for me, that's a missed buyer in price reductions and negotiations and then having to go back in and fix it. So for what was a $200 fix, I could be losing, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 off of a sale. So the quality for me is huge, and that's something that I'm stressing about with the new contractors. So we had to let him go the other week, and now we're bringing in other contractors to figure out how to finish these projects. So where that kind of has come by is, working with the agents that I'm in. They have a lot of really good connections to general contractors and other contractors who were jumping at the bit to say, hey, we're able to get in there. We're able to give you a quote. They're highly recommended by these guys. So it's like, all right, we're going to give them a shot. So we've got those guys into both of the houses now. I think I have the plan on who's going to be doing what project, and we're going to be working with two different contractors on both projects. So two contractors, one is going to be handling each house, and we're kind of going to go from there and see, how this, works, how it's going to be with, managing two different types of people and building that relationship out to where we can be flipping multiple houses at different times using these same contractors. So now instead of, one crew that's kind of working to kind of build up to where they can manage multiple houses, now I have two guys who are managing multiple projects at multiple times or at the same time, to where hopefully that will be an easier shift to say if we have 10 flips going at one time, we're able to easily manage that with multiple crews. So that's kind of like the long-term plan to see, where that takes off and where that develops. But those connections have led me to better contractors, very highly recommended people. So what we're doing right now is finalizing the quotes. So each one, we have them walk the same house and say, okay, here's ideally what I would like to do with it. So let's get our ideals put into this quote, and then we can kind of subtract from there. So now that we have the quotes saying the same thing, it's okay, here we've, taken different parts out, what can we, reduce to be able to just finish this house. So we've gotten that on both guys, and their prices are just about $10,000 different. And the biggest reason is, every contractor works differently. How they pay their guys, whether that's time, whether that's by job, and if they're having to pull any if they're having to do any inspections, if they're having to pull any permits, that adds a lot into the factor too. And sometimes they just have different guys who are able to do the job for cheaper. So that's something we're looking at in the quotes, is who can do it, who can do what, and maybe not just for the cheapest, but who's going to be able to get in there and move, and who's going to be able to work with me on the different pay options. So we have one contractor who's saying, we could get in here this week and we could start, and we could just work on a different pay schedule to where we do it in blocks, to where, we do this for the first, say we do 2 weeks worth of work, and then we can get paid. That way, I'm able to get the money, have it secured to be able to kind of push into the next step, and they're able to fund that up front rather than me having to, come out of pocket $20,000. So the other person said, hey, as long as he said, how we work is we do a certain type of down payment. So we do this down payment for any of the permits, any of the upfront work, to be able to make sure we get everything in line to be able to go and start the project. And then we can pay it in blocks so that, we're not having to go, pay 40% before the project even starts, just so they can get moving. Everybody does it a little bit differently. So just making sure, what works for me, because of the situation I'm in, exiting a partnership and being low on funds, it's really trying to figure out with those guys and working together and saying, hey, I understand this is how you do it, but here's the situation I'm in. What can we do? And they're like, okay, well, it's not the most difficult thing in the world. It's like, here, we can set up this pay schedule, and we can, this way, when you're ready, we can at least get it going and do it in, so one job isn't half finished. And so those were the two options. And then we got a third quote, and they do it completely different. They want just about 50% up front to be able to get started. So, sometimes it comes off as a red flag. So it really depends on trust when you're doing these different pay schedules. But he just said, hey, we're able to get in there. We're able to work weekends, Saturdays, Sundays. We have all different types of guys. So that's where our funding goes, because we can just get in there, we can get it done, and then we can get out. So everybody works a little bit differently. Just make sure that they're highly recommended people doing multiple projects. Try and walk their projects if you can, because then you're going to be able to see the type of quality that they're going to be doing and putting into your project. If I had known back in the day, or back when I first started working with this person, they brought in a different crew to be able to do that first house. So that first house for me was, knocked out of the park. It was quick. There was nothing that we needed to do to it. So for the second, third, and fourth projects, it was a completely different crew coming in. So what happened was, I started looking at the quality, and I'm like, it's like I don't have the experience or the eye for it. So I'm like, I know it's done, but I can't really tell like the finer details. So when these buyers are walking through the house, and then the realtor who's, done this quite a bit, they're like, hey, this isn't good. It's like, this needs touched up. And then we had problems with inspections on every single property, problems with permits. And that was something we never really had to discuss before. It's like we were trying to get ahead. We were trying to cover things up. And then we would get inspections. And then it would just kind of lead to more, and it would drag out. So there were a lot of things going on in that first working with that person, to where these guys are just straight up front before. They're like, hey, if we need to pull permits, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to knock it out right away. When we didn't really have that conversation before, until we were about halfway, or quarter to about halfway through, to where it was like, oh, now we need to worry about inspections and permits. It's like, and it was just from mainly lack of experience figuring out what needs to be done. So now that I've done a couple houses, we've had to put in a bathroom, put in an HVAC system. That's what we're learning now to be able to, move forward. It's like, okay, now we know we need this up front. Okay, now we know we can maybe get away with this part, but what was going on before and how it was working with that first contractor, it just wasn't working. So we decided to kind of move on and then go our separate directions. But that is what's been going on here in the past 2 weeks. So thank you for sticking with me. I'm going to keep documenting on these Tuesdays kind of what I'm doing in my business and then lining up interviews for the Friday episode. So make sure you tune into those, as we have some pretty high-level dudes coming on to be able to talk about what they're doing in their businesses, how they're growing, flips, multiple companies. Super excited to be bringing those guys on. And then this Friday, I'm not sure which episode's coming out yet. We're either going to be talking boutique hotels with Gideon Spencer, or we're going to be talking doing flips with Navid Atayan, who's in the North Carolina market. So make sure you tune in for those. Lots of guests coming up, and I'm excited to share them with you and introduce them to the audience. So as for this episode 172 of the Leadway Wealth Builders Podcast, this is Chris Rickenbaugh saying I'll see you on Friday with an interview.